Luxury sedan buyers under 7 grand usually get distracted by the wrong stuff. A nice badge means nothing if the transmission is weak. That is why a few forgotten 2010s flagships still make real sense today. They give you comfort, space, and that expensive highway feel, but without the gearbox nightmare that ruins so many cheap used luxury cars. Picture this one in your driveway for a second. You walk out in the morning, open that long door, drop into a sofa-soft seat, and for used Corolla money, you get the kind of car that still makes a parking lot feel too small. Number 1. 2010 to 2011 Cadillac DTS. People laugh at it until they ride in one, and then they get it. This is not a sharp canyon road sedan. It is a rolling living room, and that is exactly why it still works. Under the hood, you get Cadillac's 4.6L Northstar V8 with 275 horsepower in most trims paired to the old-school 4-speed automatic. That gearbox matters here. It is not fancy, not quick, and definitely not modern, but it is one of those transmissions that survives because it was built for smooth torque, not spec sheet bragging. In a market full of aging luxury cars with scary transmission reputations, this one feels almost stubbornly old and durable. On the road, the experience is pure comfort first. It floats over rough pavement, stays calm on the highway, and makes long drives feel shorter than they are. Real fuel economy is the obvious trade-off. Expect roughly 15 mpg in the city and around 22 to 23 on the highway. So, nobody should buy this pretending it is cheap to feed. You buy it because 7 grand does not usually get you this much space, this much quiet, and this much old American luxury presence. Now, here is the buyer mistake to avoid. Do not show up obsessed with the transmission and ignore the rest of the car. The smart inspection is underneath and under the hood. Check for oil leaks, coolant seepage, tired engine mounts, weak electronic gadgets, soft front suspension parts, and worn power steering components. The transmission itself is usually not the headline problem, but neglect around it absolutely can be. If the shifts are smooth, the fluid is not burnt, and the car pulls clean without flare or slam, that is a very good sign. Price is where this gets interesting. In today's North American market, rough but running examples can dip into the mid-4,000 range, while cleaner 2010 and 2011 cars usually sit between about 5,500 and 7,000, with especially clean low-mile cars climbing higher. This is the one for the viewer who wants comfort over image, highway serenity over sporty marketing, and a transmission that is more proven than impressive on paper. And real quick, if you are shopping older sedans like this, keep a basic toolkit and a quick tire repair kit in the trunk. That is not paranoia. That is grown-up used car ownership. One small roadside problem feels a lot less dramatic when you already planned for it. Because the funny thing about the DTS is this: the people ignoring it are the reason it still makes sense. But the next car takes the exact opposite route to value. And that is where this list gets a lot more interesting. This one hits differently when you are the buyer who wants people to stop assuming cheap means basic. You pull up in a 2011 or 2012. Number 2, Hyundai Equus. And half the room still does a double take because it looks expensive in that quiet old-school flagship way. Not flashy, not desperate, just big, smooth, and weirdly confident. That is the whole Equus experience. It was Hyundai trying to prove it could build a real luxury sedan, not a dressed-up near-luxury car. And you feel that the second you spend time in one. The cabin is soft, isolated, loaded with features, and tuned for the kind of comfort that makes highway miles disappear. This is the car for the viewer who wants S-Class energy without signing up for S-Class ownership drama. Mechanically, the story depends on the year. The 2011 uses a 4.6L V8 with about 378 horsepower on regular fuel, paired to a 6-speed automatic. For 2012, Hyundai stepped it up with a 5.0 LV8, making 429 horsepower and an in-house 8-speed automatic. That later transmission is one reason this car even makes this list. It is smoother than most people expect, and in a market where aging luxury sedans can turn terrifying once the gearbox starts acting up, the Equus has a much calmer reputation than the badge on the trunk would suggest. Fuel economy is exactly what you would expect from a big rear-drive V8 flagship. Think around 16 city and 24 highway for the 2011. Then roughly 15 city and 23 to 24 highway for the 2012 depending on trim and source. Nobody buys this to save fuel. You buy it because it feels far more expensive than what the used market now thinks it is worth. Now here is the smart buyer warning. Do not inspect this car like it is an old Avalon. Inspect it like a discounted flagship. That means checking air suspension behavior, electronics, seat functions, screen operation, and service history for careful maintenance. A cheap Equus can still become an expensive Equus if the previous owner enjoyed the luxury, but skipped the upkeep. The transmission may not be the part that scares you off here. Deferred maintenance should. And yes, the price gap is the reason this thing is so tempting. Right now, high-mile 2012 cars can still show up right around the 7,000 mark, while nicer examples and cleaner 2011 to 2012 cars usually sit well above that, often closer to 9, 10, or much more depending on mileage and condition. So this is not the easiest car on the list to buy under budget, but when one slips into the range, it gives you an absurd amount of sedan for the money. The funny part is this car was ignored when it was new by badge snobs, and it still gets ignored now for the exact same reason. Which brings us to the next sedan, a car that nobody bought for prestige at all, and that is exactly why it aged so well. If this is already changing how you look at the used market, hit the like button. It tells YouTube this kind of honest breakdown actually matters. Also, drop your city in the comments and check the selected products. Now, switch perspectives completely and think like the buyer who is tired of modern cars pretending to be relaxing. Number 3. 2011 Lincoln Town Car does not pretend to be anything. It is old school on purpose, and that is exactly why the right viewer is going to love it. You do not buy this one to impress people who read spec sheets. You buy it because you want the kind of sedan that feels honest the second you drive it. The steering is easy. The cabin is wide, the seats are built for real adults, and the whole car has that slow-breathing, unhurried personality most newer sedans completely lost. This is not trying to feel sporty. It is trying to make every commute less irritating. And honestly, that still has value. Under the hood sits Ford's 4.6L V8, making 239 horsepower and 287 pounds-feet of torque tied to a 4-speed automatic. On paper, that sounds ancient, because it is. But that is also the point. This is one of the last true body-on-frame American sedans. And the transmission is part of why these cars keep surviving in fleets, executive service, and taxi-style abuse long after trendier luxury sedans have already become repair projects. It is not fast, not advanced, and not subtle about its age. It is just proven. Fuel economy is the obvious compromise. Realistically, expect around 16 mpg in the city and 24 on the highway. And nobody should be shocked by that. But this is where the town car makes sense for a specific buyer. If you care more about comfort, durability, and cheap mechanical familiarity than cornering or gadget overload, this thing still feels like a smart move. Here is the mechanic-style reality check. The transmission is usually not the thing that should scare you. What you want to inspect is air suspension behavior. If the car still has its original setup, intake manifold history on older Panther platform relatives, front-end wear, tired steering components, and signs of a hard commercial life. A town car that idles smoothly, shifts cleanly, tracks straight, and does not sag in the rear is usually telling you the story you want to hear. And the market still leaves room here. Rougher or higher mile examples can show up around 5,000, while cleaner 2010 and 2011 cars often sit in the 6,000 to 7,000 range, with especially nice ones pushing higher simply because survivors are getting harder to find. One current listing example for a 2010 town car shows about 143,000 miles at 4,995, which is exactly why buyers who understand these cars keep watching the market. This is the sedan for someone who wants peace, not performance theater. But the next car flips the formula again, because now we move from soft, old-school comfort to something sharper, quicker, and a lot more underrated than most buyers realize. Now imagine you are the buyer who still wants a little attitude from a flagship sedan, not fake sportiness. Real shove, rear drive balance, and the kind of passing power that makes an on-ramp feel shorter than it is. Number 4. 2011 to 2013 Infiniti M37 separates itself from the rest of this list. This is the one for somebody who wants luxury without giving up reflexes. The M37 uses a 3.7 L V6, making 330 horsepower and 270 pounds-feet of torque, backed by a 7-speed automatic. Rear-wheel drive versions were rated at about 18 city and 26 highway, while all-wheel drive models land a little lower. On paper, it already looks stronger than most of the cars people cross-shop at this price, and on the road it feels exactly like that. It pulls hard, sounds better than it needs to, and still gives you the kind of cabin quiet and seat comfort that makes long trips easy. What makes the M37 interesting in this video is that it does not drive like a compromised car. A lot of older luxury sedans under $7,000 feel like you are accepting age, softness, or image damage in exchange for value. The Infiniti does not really do that. It still feels substantial, still looks expensive enough, and still has enough power to remind you this was not built for bargain hunters in the first place. That matters because some viewers want a used flagship that feels alive, not just comfortable. Now, here is the trade-off explanation that actually saves buyers money. The transmission in these cars is usually not why people walk away. What deserves your attention is how the car was maintained around it. On a test drive, watch for rough shifting, hesitation, or lazy response, but spend just as much time checking electronics, dash warnings, power accessories, and signs that the car lived a neglected luxury car life. A smooth-driving M37 with a clean service history can feel like a steal. A cheap one with ignored issues can still become a headache fast. And the market tells the whole story. Across current used listings, rougher or very high-mile examples can slip under $4,000. But the average asking price for a 2011 M37 is closer to the high $8,000 range, with cleaner cars often well above your budget. That means finding one under $7,000 is possible, but usually means higher miles, cosmetic flaws, or a seller who wants it gone. In other words, this is not the easiest bargain here, but it may be the most satisfying one to drive. So, the M37 is really for the viewer who wants one last reminder that a luxury sedan can still have personality. Not just comfort, not just size, actual personality. And that is what makes this whole list matter, because every one of these cars was ignored for a different reason, while buyers kept overlooking the one thing that could make them worth owning now. These cars matter because they hit a part of the market most buyers still misunderstand. Cheap flagship sedans are not automatically bad deals. Bad transmissions are. That is the difference. A DTS gives you soft American comfort. The Equus delivers hidden luxury. The town car stays brutally honest. And the M37 brings real driver appeal. Different personalities, same lesson. When the gearbox is proven, an old luxury sedan can still make real sense. That is exactly where smart money still wins. See you in the next one.